Hello and good afternoon.
Hey, it's Jared Anderson calling in.
What's going on, Jared?
Not much.
Are you sitting in a forest right now?
No, I'm afraid not.
Oh, man, then you should be jealous of me because I live in a forest.
Oh, hey, nice.
This has been my baby since 1992, and boy, I'll tell you what, I mean, your book just speaks just volumes of what's truly found out there inside those trees.
It's so good to hear that.
It's amazing because, I mean, one of the things that I've always studied for the past, 30 years or so is Ted Andrews and the power of, totem animals. And what does your book do? It starts focusing in on the very animals I've studied over the years.
Yeah, it was an interesting question for me to figure out how to organize that book, right? Because I had a story I wanted to tell. I wanted to talk about mental health, but all of that can be too big until you kind of focus it down on an organizing principle. And for me, the one that made the most sense was, seasons and animals and trees that all sort of mean something to me.
What drew you to the forest?
Geez, I don't remember a time without the forest, honestly. I sort of grew up in a rural town in Ohio, and some of my earliest memories are taking daily nature walks with my mom to notice, which spring ephemeral was blooming, or hear the call of a green heron nearby. And so that's just always been kind of a foundational part of how I make friends with the world.
That's every bit the reason why I take a transition walk every day, and it's because it gives me an opportunity to go through the transitions that we all move through on a daily basis. The person you are in the morning versus who you change into, in the afternoon. You've got to be able to separate those things and take in the stories of the birds.
Yeah, transition's huge, and that was something that I had trouble kind of acclimating toward in my own mental health journey. Kind of this idea that there are daily transitions, sure, but then in my own mind, in my own inner landscape, there are also seasons and weather.
Yep.
And learning to recognize it and come to terms with it, not as a thing to fight or to push against, but just sort of to recognize and be on good terms with.
Yeah, and what's really important about this book, especially the timing of this book, is that we're about ready to go through daylight savings time. And this book right here would serve as a great tool for readers. And the reason is because they too will go through changes too, like you talked about the seasons. And a book like this helps them understand, I can do this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main metaphors that I found helpful that I talk about in the book is this idea of brain weather.
Yeah.
Because one of the big stumbling blocks for me in pursuing mental health was just overwhelming shame. Mm-hmm. Shame that, I didn't deserve healing, or I wasn't worth the effort to try to pursue health or contentment or happiness. What's the point? And starting to think of my own life, my own mind as more of a natural phenomenon, not a thing that needed a report card, was huge for me. Like brain weather, if a thunderstorm cancels a picnic you were going to have, right? You might be disappointed. You probably would be disappointed, but what you wouldn't be is ashamed, because you understand that the thunderstorm is natural and you didn't invite it and you don't control it. So there's no shame attached. All right, well, for me, depression, it's a natural phenomenon. I didn't invite it. I don't control it. So why am I attaching shame to this thing?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I call it the monster. Today I'm dealing with the monster. Okay, what do you want to talk about? It's that kind of thing. And do you find yourself defragging it all? In other words, keeping a journal and asking yourself the questions and then questioning the answers?
Yeah, that's been huge, because all of this is so abstract if I don't write any of it down. And one phrase I land on a lot in the book is depression defends itself. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways it defends itself is by vanishing into smoke. Or, sometimes it feels like a ghost and it can hit you, but you can't hit it. Mm-hmm. All right, well, taking a lot of these damaging thoughts and then tethering them to a page, writing them down, okay, now there's something in front of you that you can have a conversation with. You can interrogate it, rather than just a bunch of abstract defeats where there's these hit and runs where these negative thoughts come in and then vanish. So yeah, that's been very important.
Do you think creativity is an addiction and a lot of people don't understand that they've got the bite and they don't know what to do with it?
I suppose. I mean, I certainly can't stop. One of the things about being a writer, somebody asks me sometimes, like, how do you stay motivated to write? And the question is always a little bit strange to me because it's just something I have always done. So, for me, it's like, all right, well, how can you not? It's addictive in that, like, it's the power of creation. When I play with fantasy, I have my episodic fictional podcast about fictional nature, and that's creating worlds whole cloth. Or I have when I write poetry, or I write about mental health, and that's a real tangible tool for making sense of my world, and in a lot of ways for discovering what I think when sometimes I myself don't know.
I'm glad that you created a podcast, and the reason being is a lot of people don't realize that back in the 1980s when podcasting first stepped out onto the scene, it was the writers, it was the thinkers and the poets that really developed that. It wasn't the rock stars, it wasn't even the comedians, it was the writers who did that, and you're living up to the history of what podcasting is.
I mean, what was so exciting for me is that there were no gatekeepers.
Yeah.
I was in this job that I was sort of miserable in kind of a director level position at a university. And I was like, okay, in this context, writing isn't fun. Words aren't fun. What would I do if I could literally just do whatever I wanted for the joy of it? And as somebody who's always loved audio and storytelling, it hit me. There was nobody between me and writing and recording a podcast. So, I mean, that was intoxicating when I started it, and it still is. And that show, the Crypto Naturalist, is really all about enthusiasm for enthusiasm's sake. I'm a nature lover, a science lover, but for that show, I was like, all right, what if I just lean into enthusiasm completely divorced from fact, which is kind of a cathartic thing for me to do.
When did you discover the confidence to be able to reach out there and, first of all, share your writing, and then to have even more confidence to put it in a podcast?
Yeah, I think at its heart, for me, writing is about connection. Otherwise, I write it down and put it in a drawer. And while I might like the process of writing, the magic for me is to connect one mind to another. So there's no question that the vulnerability of sharing something you create is terrifying. But over the 3 decades I've been publishing writing, I mean, that terror is offset by the thrill of finding someone who connects with your work. I mean, it's just worth it, I guess, is how I would phrase it.
So what are you going to do with your writing? Because I've got 3 decades of daily writing inside this studio, all packed up in these very protective boxes. But then that we're all going to transition somewhere along the line. Who's going to protect your writing? Because it doesn't really necessarily belong to this generation.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so I have a master's in literature. It's sort of my background as a scholar, and something I've come to terms with over the years is that after I write something and put it out in the world, it's kind of not mine anymore.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Yep.
So while I'm certainly curious what maybe future generations might do with my writing, there's a part of me that kind of raises a hand in that curiosity and says, "Nah, that's none of your business," which takes a little bit of a Zen mindset to make peace with, but making peace with impermanence is, part of the work I do in my own road to mental health.
You write about that 1 in 5 people in America right now struggle with mental illness. Today we talk about it. 10, 15 years ago, my brother was that guy that people pointed fingers at.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're huge. I mean, growing up, there was always kind of an understanding that I internalized that there's a stigma about mental illness and you don't bring it up.
Yeah.
And it took me a very long time to get past that. And part of it was rooted in culture, and part of it was rooted in this idea that my worth is tied to my productivity. Some of it was rooted in my own sense of masculinity, to be, silent and stoic. But over the years, I've come to understand that vulnerability, while terrifying, is the actual path to wholeness and connection and strength. Facing that fear and then trying to be your authentic self. Most of my favorite things in my life have come by walking down that scary path.
Yep. Yeah, and sometimes it's not even visible. It's like a mirage on a highway. By the time you get there, it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dealing with that moment, though, Jared, I mean, how do you put yourself back together and keep it together?
Dealing with vulnerability?
Yeah.
Honestly, for me, it takes almost a leap of blind faith. And part of it in the context of depression, this idea that depression defends itself, that in my worst depressive moments, if I try to even think about it in terms of depression, there's a little voice that says, you're not depressed, you're objective. Other people are depressed. You're just recognizing a broken world and a flawed life, and on and on and on. And so the idea of seeking therapy or medication or even, our own agency to make meaning, it takes a kind of strange blind faith, because what are you talking about? You're talking about vulnerability in the service of altering your own perspective on the world, which almost takes a level of magical thinking.
Yeah.
But that was the entrance to the path for me, and it's made all the difference.
When it comes to you taking the walks through the forest and being a part of the trees, I don't know if you have just one little forest that you go to or if you share it with several, but what are you giving back to the forest since you are receiving so much?
I mean, I have all of these little rituals that I don't know, that I have to kind of smile at and be like, well, maybe this is magical thinking and maybe it's not. Maybe my thoughts influence this, but I mean, I have a tendency to touch trees and say thank you on
absolutely.
my way out. And, I have more than once pressed my forehead to the living wood and, thought gratitude into the tree or out into the world. And, gratitude, I feel like, is a gift to ourselves as much as it's a gift to our world. And, I really feel in kind of a deep intrinsic way that the thoughts we bring with us really do shape our reality.
I just did some research on can a tree hear you? And the research that I came up with was that no, trees can't hear you, but they feel your touch. So that was very interesting that you said that you actually go up and touch the tree. They love that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge tradition when I was a kid. There was this huge spreading sugar maple, and my parents had a couple acres of woods, and everybody called that Jarod's tree because I would be up in there constantly, and I would sleep in the branches, and I'd put my cheek against the wood. And then, as now, I felt like I could feel the life inside the tree. And, you do that, and you feel that sense of connection, and it feels very real. The back and forth, the conversation.
Yeah. What was the editing like for you for this book? Because, as writers, I mean, once you put it on a page, I mean, we're in control, but then you have to give it to the editor.
That can be very scary, but in the case with my editor, Ryan at Timber Press, I really felt like he helped it become its best self. Which it really felt like a collaboration because, in the case of this book, talking about nature and mental health and making meaning, these are all huge concepts. So, I mean, one of the big struggles for me was kind of reining it in. I mean, part of the process of sharpening up our writing is kind of deciding what we are going to focus on and how we're going to focus in and putting guardrails on it so that it doesn't just sort of sprawl out in every direction. And so I really appreciated that collaborative process.
I'm a pretty hardcore pen whore. In other words, I love my writing instruments. I've had some that have been with me for almost 30 years now, these writing instruments. Do you do the same? Do you have your favorite ones?
I lose things too much.
Oh, God.
So I buy 30 packs because... Boy, I lose stuff constantly, but I do always have a pen and a journal with me.
Yeah. So you do the rollerball? Because I'm going to tell you what, the friction of a writing instrument on the page, to me, can be a mood changer.
Yeah. I usually do rollerball, and there is something very tactile about it, I think.
Yeah. Just oh my God, your book is just so perfect. It to me, it serves as an invitation. It also, as somebody who writes a lot, it also you're exposing your studenthood to me as a reader. It's like, okay, I'm reading about this student who is now growing into this teacher who is going to grow. There's just so much growth inside these pages.
I mean, one thing that I think is important for me is to try to always stay within that student mindset.
Yep.
I share in to honor sharing as one of the key strengths of the human animal. But I have a 4-year-old, and sometimes he and I walk out in the woods, and I see kind of like the effortless ease with which he accesses wonder and enthusiasm for the natural world. And as a 43-year-old man, that's something that I'm constantly trying to return to.
Yeah.
And, he does it without thinking. And so he has a lot to teach. I think kind of all of us have the student hat and the teacher hat, and learning to switch between them is really an important aspect to experiencing the world fully.
You know what's great about being 43 years old?
What?
That I'm 62 and I have all of my writing when I was 43. So you're going to be able to go back to your 43s, and you're going to sit down with your son and your grandson, and you're going to say, this is what I was writing when I was this age.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Oh my
I sometimes look at poetry I wrote when I was 10, and in a way that person is a stranger, and in a way I absolutely feel the thread between then and now, and it's a really wonderful feeling.
Wow. Where can people go to find out more about you? Where can they get your podcast? Are you on iHeart? Where are you at, man?
Yeah, I think I'm all over the place as the crypto naturalist. And then the book is Something in the Woods Loves You. You'd find any place that you'll find books. And I'm across social media as the Crypto Naturalist, where I do a confusing mix of mental health talk and nature poetry and chat about my podcast as well.
Well, that's what it's all about. Dude, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. I love where your heart is, and you're such a great conversationalist.
Oh, I'd love to. This has been so much fun.
Excellent. Will you be brilliant today, okay, Jared?
Thank you. You too. Have a great day.